A photograph can be a kind of ghost, not the kind that moans in halls or hides behind curtains, but the quiet sort, the one that lives inside paper and light. The story begins with such a photograph, a class portrait from Brookhaven College, taken in the spring of 1961. The yearbook calls it the graduating class of Brookhaven. On its surface, it is perfectly ordinary. The boys are clean-cut and confident, the girls arranged in neat rows, their smiles polite and practiced. The photo is faded now, the colors soften into the warm tones of memory, but there's something about it that refuses to age, something that feels alive in a way photographs shouldn't. It takes a moment to notice. At first, your eye drifts over the crowd, counting faces, admiring the symmetry of the shot. Then you stop. In the third row, far left, there's a shadow, not the trick of the camera or a fault of exposure, but a human outline, standing slightly apart from the others. No name beneath it, no mention in the printed list of students. And yet, somehow it's there, a figure that should not exist. The story that follows is not about what happened that day, but about what happened after. Because months before that photograph was taken or printed, depending on who tells the story, 3 students vanished from Brookhaven College. Their names were Eleanor Price, Thomas Reeves, and Harold Finch. They were not famous or notorious. They were simply students, 20 or 21 years old, studying literature, biology, and art. They disappeared without a trace in April of that same year. No witnesses, no signs of struggle, not even a letter of goodbye. The police wrote them off as runaways, and the campus quietly moved on. But when the yearbook came back from the printers that autumn, all 3 of them appeared in it, smiling, alive, and posed as though they had never been gone. For decades, the story has been told in fragments, whispered in dorm rooms, resurfacing in late-night radio segments or local newspaper anniversaries. Most people laugh it off, another college ghost story in a state full of them. Yet those who've seen the photo, who've held it in their hands, describe the same strange feeling, that the image is aware of being looked at, that the faces in it seem to return the gaze. Brookhaven College still stands, a small red brick campus wrapped in oak and ivy just outside Charleston. Its lawns stretch quietly toward the marshes, and on warm days, the air carries the sound of church bells from a nearby town. There's nothing remarkable about it. Yet for those who know where to look, the yearbook rests behind glass in the college archives, its spine worn, its pages heavy with the scent of age. Every few years, someone new stumbles upon it and feels that shiver of wrongness, the moment the photo begins to feel less like documentation and more like a door. When you look closer, you start to notice small inconsistencies. The lighting on Eleanor's face doesn't match the rest of the group. The shadows on Tommy's jacket fall at a different angle than the sunlight behind him. Harold's tie is slightly blurred, as if he moved during the shot, and yet every other figure is perfectly still. Photographic experts have examined it, declared it a product of poor editing or print degradation. But the negatives have never been found, and the college records show no photographer listed for that page. People who knew them, or claimed to, remember them fondly. Eleanor with her soft voice and notebooks full of sketches. Tommy with a quick grin, always carrying his camera. Harold, quiet, always reading in the corner of the dining hall. They were ordinary in every sense, and maybe that's why their absence left such a deep mark. Their dorm rooms were cleaned, their names erased from attendance rolls. But among the students, something lingered, an unease that never quite lifted. When the yearbook arrived, that unease became something else. Fear wrapped in disbelief, because there they were, printed for everyone to see, smiling like nothing had ever gone wrong. Over the years, theories multiplied. Some said the yearbook staff used old photos without realizing the students were gone. Others insisted it was a prank. A few whispered darker possibilities, that the students had been part of some secret experiment, something tied to the psychology department's rumored research grant. But the more one looked for facts, the fewer there seemed to be. College archives from that year are missing. Newspaper clippings from April 1961 have been cut from microfilm. Even the local police logs list the case numbers, but no corresponding reports. It's as if the story was carefully erased, piece by piece, until only the photograph remained. Still, A few details survived through rumor and recollection. One former librarian recalled a man visiting in the 1980s, asking to see the Brookhaven 3 file. When she went to retrieve it, the drawer was empty, though she swore she'd seen the photo the week before. Another story tells a janitor who worked in the photography lab and claimed that one of the negatives burned itself during development. A flash of light, so bright it left a mark on his vision for days. He quit the next morning. And so, the photo became the centerpiece of the legend, the proof that something impossible had happened in that quiet, sunlit college. Historians and paranormal investigators have both taken their turns dissecting it, yet none have managed to explain how 3 vanished students could reappear in a publication dated months after their disappearance. Some say it's all coincidence. Others think it's an echo, a moment caught between presence and absence. The truth remains buried, blurred like the edges of that mysterious print. What makes the image so haunting isn't just what it shows, but what it implies, that memory and reality may not always agree. That perhaps photographs don't just capture us. They keep us. And maybe, just maybe, Brookhaven's yearbook wasn't documenting the past, but preserving something that refused to fade. This is where the story begins, with a photograph that shouldn't exist and a college that would rather it didn't. The camera shutter clicks once, the flash goes off, and the faces are sealed in time. No one knows yet that the image will outlast every witness, every rumor, every name in the register. Only the photo remains, patient and waiting, as the years pass and the legend takes shape. Somewhere between ink and shadow, 3 students still smile for a picture no one remembers taking. Spring in South Carolina has a way of disguising unease. The air is thick with the sweetness of magnolia and rain, and at Brookhaven College in 1961, life seemed to hum with promise. Students lounged on the grass. Radios murmured Elvis through the open dorm windows, and the world, at least within the boundaries of the campus, felt safe, orderly, eternal. It was a time of quiet ambitions and restless dreams, the kind of days that turn golden in memory. But that season, beneath the calm, something unseen began to stir, a slow unraveling that no one recognized until it was far too late. Brookhaven wasn't a large school. It was a cluster of Georgian-style buildings, their red bricks softened by ivy, their white columns gleaming in the afternoon sun. Most of the faculty lived on campus, and nearly every student knew each other by name. It was the kind of place where gossip spread faster than wind, and every absence was noticed by morning roll call. The spring semester of 1961 was no different. Seniors prepared for graduation, juniors juggled exams and dances, and the yearbook committee set up cameras beneath the live oaks, capturing moments they believed would last a lifetime. Eleanor Price was one of those faces. 19 years old, soft-spoken, with a sketchbook that never left her hands. Her friend said she saw the world in shapes and shadows, that she'd sit on the library steps for hours, drawing reflections in puddles after the rain. Her roommate later described her as gentle but distracted, often up late, staring out the window toward a quad, as if waiting for someone who never came. She was the kind of person people noticed without realizing why. Too quiet for attention, too thoughtful to forget. Thomas Reeves, 21, studied biology but cared more for photography. He carried his camera everywhere. An old Argus C3 that clattered when he wound it. His dorm mates joked that he photographed everything that moved: birds, bicycles, clouds, faces caught mid-laugh. He wanted to capture the seconds that don't want to be remembered, as he once wrote in his journal. There was a loneliness in him, a searching quality. People said he was bright, funny, a little restless. The kind of student who would leave at midnight to drive toward nowhere, just to see how far he could go before sunrise. And then there was Harold Finch. He came from Charleston, a scholarship student majoring in literature, known for his quiet brilliance and awkward charm. He wore thick glasses that always slid down his nose and carried books like armor. To professors, he was dependable. To classmates, forgettable. But those who knew him better said he had a strange intensity, that sometimes, when he read aloud in class, his voice trembled as if he were channeling something beyond himself. He was fascinated by myths, by the idea that stories outlast their tellers. No one would have guessed that these 3, Eleanor the artist, Tommy the photographer, Harold the dreamer, would become inseparable that spring. They met during an elective psychology seminar called Perception and Reality, taught by a visiting lecturer from Columbia University. The class explored how the human mind constructs memory, how what we see is only a version of what truly exists. Students performed small experiments, light distortions, color illusions, mirror tricks. Nothing remarkable. But those who took the class remembered how the lecturer often lingered on one phrase. Reality is an agreement we keep making. That semester, the three began spending time together outside of class. They'd meet under the oak grove near the western edge of campus, where the ground sloped down toward a creek. Eleanor sketched, Tommy took photos, Harold read aloud from borrowed books. They were an unlikely trio, but their friendship seemed to anchor them, three minds orbiting a shared curiosity. Then, in late March, something began to shift. It started with whispers, odd ones. Eleanor missing lectures, Tommy skipping lab sessions, Harold seen talking to a professor long after office hours. Nothing alarming at first. Students vanished for weekends all the time, but soon their absences overlapped. A classmate recalled seeing them near the old library basement entrance, which had been sealed for years. Another swore they were seen in the photography darkroom after hours, though no one could confirm it. At the same time, Brookhaven's calm exterior began to crack. Rumors spread about a secret faculty research group experimenting with sensory retention, a theory about imprinting human perception onto film. The psychology department had recently received a quiet grant from an unnamed donor, and several students noted new equipment arriving in crates marked restricted materials. No one asked questions. In 1961, you didn't question professors. You trusted that the school knew what it was doing. And yet, by mid-April, a tension hung over campus, invisible but unmistakable. Small things began to feel off. The lights flickered more often in the dorms. The photography lab smelled of ozone and burned paper. One student found a set of negatives labeled with initials, EP, TR, HF. Though when he tried to develop them, the images dissolved into blank gray. He laughed it off, tossed the film away, and didn't think of it again until later when the news broke. It happened quietly. The first to be noticed missing was Eleanor. Her roommate returned from class to find the window open and her belongings untouched. She assumed Eleanor had gone sketching by the creek. The next morning, Tommy's bed was empty, his camera gone. 2 days later, Harold failed to show up for his literature presentation. By Friday, the campus was murmuring. By Monday, their names were being whispered with fear. The college administration moved swiftly, too swiftly, some said. Within days, dorm records were sealed, professors were told not to comment, and local authorities issued a simple statement. 3 students have left campus without notice. There is no evidence of foul play. Search parties scoured the surrounding woods, but the trails ended abruptly near the creek, as if the trio had stepped off the world itself. Spring went on. Exams arrived. The lawns turned green, and the jazz in the common rooms never stopped playing. Students forced themselves to carry on, though the laughter had thinned, and eyes lingered longer on the shadows beneath the oak trees. When graduation day came, the missing names were not mentioned. The ceremony continued as planned, every smile rehearsed, every photograph taken with a care that bordered on superstition. In time, the rumor faded into background noise, another strange story from a small southern college. Life moved forward, as it always does. The next class arrived, the campus bloomed again. But for those who had been there that spring, something remained unspoken, a kind of unfinished sentence left hanging in the air. Because 3 friends had walked out of view, leaving no trace but the faint scent of darkroom chemicals and the echo of a camera shutter that might never have closed. What no one could have predicted was that their faces would return, months later, when the yearbooks arrived in neat cardboard boxes and students gathered to flip through glossy pages of memory. There they were, Eleanor, Tommy, and Harold, smiling as if the missing months had never existed, as if the vanishings had been nothing but a bad dream. The image was perfect, too perfect, as though time itself had conspired to bring them back. But the season that began with sunlight and laughter would end in silence, and Brookhaven College would never again feel entirely alive. The first dorm room, They entered was Eleanor's. It was a soft Sunday morning, the kind where sunlight draped itself across everything in sheets of gold. Indifferent to what had gone missing, the air smelled faintly of dust and lilac perfume. Nothing appeared out of place. Her shoes were lined neatly beside the bed, the sheets tucked tight, her sketchbook open on the desk with a pencil laid carefully across the page. The drawing she'd been working on was unfinished. A faint outline of 3 figures standing beneath the campus oaks, their faces still blank. Her roommate, a sophomore named Mary Cotter, stood in the doorway, trembling. She had waited 2 nights before reporting Eleanor missing, hoping she'd come back on her own. Eleanor was known to take walks late into the night, especially when she was anxious about exams or homesick. But now, standing in that silent room, Mary knew something wasn't right. The police officer who took notes in a leather-bound pad wrote the same words he had already scribbled twice that week. No sign of forced entry. The door lock was intact. The window was open, curtain fluttering in the warm April air. There were no footprints outside, only a scattering of petals from the magnolia tree. Down the hall, another door stood ajar, Tommy Reeves's room. He shared it with a football player who'd been away for the weekend. Inside, the bed was unmade, the kind of mess that suggested hurry, not panic. Books on biology and optics lay stacked on the desk, alongside a half-finished roll of film and an empty coffee cup. His camera was gone, but his jacket still hung on the chair, and his wallet sat beside the lamp untouched. One of the officers noted that the lamp bulb had shattered inward, as if imploding, leaving a ring of glass dust across the desk. They brushed it aside, said nothing, and moved on. The last room they checked belonged to Harold Finch. It was in a quieter dormitory, older, the kind that creaked with every footstep. When the door opened, a stale chill met them, a stillness so complete that one of the searchers instinctively lowered his voice. Harold's typewriter was still loaded with paper, the ink ribbon half-spooled. The last line read, "Memory is not what remains, it's what refuses to leave." The words looked rushed. The final letter struck twice as though his hand had shaken. His suitcase was under the bed, packed for the Easter holiday but never taken. In each of the 3 rooms, the same subtle order prevailed. Not the chaos of disappearance, but the quiet of interruption. Whatever had happened to them had not come with violence. It had come gently, without struggle, without sound. The investigators would later describe it as if the students had simply stood up and walked out, mid-thought, mid-sentence, mid-life. The search began within hours. Campus security swept the dorms, library, and dining hall. Volunteers combed through the oak grove where the trio often met. By evening, the local sheriff had been called. He was a large man with a lined face, more accustomed to missing livestock than missing college kids. To him, it smelled of runaway impulse. Kids wanted to escape exams or small-town rules. He took statements with polite skepticism, making note of times and dates, but not a growing unease among the students. Still, the details began to twist around each other in strange ways. A student from the art department swore she had seen the 3 walking together near the library that very morning, laughing, talking, Eleanor carrying her sketchbook as usual. She was certain because she had drawn them. In her notebook, she produced a quick charcoal sketch. 3 figures near the oak grove, indistinct but recognizable. When the police asked her to show where she saw them, she led them to the back steps of the library. But the ground there was untouched, no footprints, no sign of anyone having passed. She insisted she wasn't mistaken. "They were there," she said softly. "I saw them." The sheriff dismissed it. But later that week, another student came forward, a boy from the photography club. He said he had developed a roll of film the day before the disappearances, and one frame, just one, showed the 3 of them in the reflection of a window. "It's weird," he said, "because I didn't take that picture." When he tried to show the photograph, the image was gone. The negative had clouded, overexposed beyond recognition. By midweek, the search expanded to the surrounding woods and marshes. Officers on horseback traced the creek bank, while volunteers dragged the shallows with nets. Nothing. No footprints, no torn fabric, no discarded belongings. Only the natural sound of the place. Cicadas, frogs, wind. The world remained utterly calm, indifferent to the panic that grew within the college walls. The administration held a closed meeting with faculty. Professors were instructed not to speculate publicly. The official statement released to the local press read, 3 students are currently unaccounted for. Brookhaven authorities are cooperating fully with local law enforcement. There is no evidence of foul play. But behind those words was something unsaid, a sense of dread that had begun to spread through the faculty halls. Something whispered between closed doors. A custodian who worked in Eleanor's dorm later told her nephew that when he'd gone to clean her room a week after the disappearance, he found the sketchbook still on the desk. But when he flipped through the pages, every drawing of faces, students, professors, even her self-portraits, had been shaded over, erased until nothing remained but the faint outlines of bodies under trees. I put the book back, he said. Didn't feel right to touch it again. Nighttime on campus changed after that. Students began locking their doors, something they'd never done before. The laughter in the common areas dulled. The Oak Grove, once a place of spring picnics and flirtation, became avoided territory. People said that if you stood there long enough, you'd feel a pressure in the air like the hum before lightning. By the second week, the sheriff's confidence had faded. His team found no leads, no witnesses beyond rumor. He interviewed professors, librarians, even the groundskeepers. All described the missing trio as quiet, kind, normal. But one faculty member, a psychology assistant named Ruth Keller, mentioned something strange. She said she'd seen them carrying boxes down to the old library basement 2 nights before they vanished. When asked what was in the boxes, she hesitated. It looked like film equipment, she finally said. But that section's been sealed since '57. No one's supposed to have a key. Her comment was written in the sheriff's notes and then quietly removed from the final report. By the end of April, the search was over. The creek had been dragged, the woods combed twice. The sheriff closed the case provisionally, presumed voluntary departure. No bodies, no clues, only rooms left untouched and a lingering sense that the story was not finished. And yet, as the days turned into weeks, the strangest thing happened. People began claiming to see them. A girl walking past the library at dusk said she glimpsed Harold through the glass, reading by lamplight. A janitor swore he heard laughter echoing from the darkroom long after it had been locked for the night. Even Mary Cotter, still shaken, thought she saw Eleanor's reflection in the window of their old dorm, smiling faintly before fading into the sunlight. No one could prove these sightings, and soon the stories were dismissed as hysteria, the natural consequence of fear and rumor. But those who experienced them spoke with quiet conviction. It was as though the missing students had not left the campus entirely, as if they lingered somewhere between the visible and the forgotten. Months later, when the yearbooks arrived and the faces of the vanished appeared in their pages, the same feeling washed over everyone who looked, that the dorm rooms had never truly emptied, that the quiet order of those spaces had not been abandonment, but preservation, a world paused mid-breath, waiting for something to return. And in some way, perhaps it already had. In the quiet hum of the basement beneath Brookhaven's library, where the scent of chemicals hung heavy in the air, the yearbook committee worked long hours at spring. They were a small team, 6 students and 1 supervising faculty member, piecing together what was meant to be a cheerful record of the year. Class photos, candid moments, the gentle fiction of a perfect campus. Down there, the walls were painted a dull cream. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly, and the only window was a high rectangle of frosted glass that let in a sliver of afternoon sun. The air was always cool, and the clock above the darkroom door ticked louder than it should have. The committee's leader, Margaret Howell, was a senior majoring in journalism, organized, confident, endlessly patient. She spent most nights in that basement, sorting negatives, marking captions, and overseeing the photo layouts that would define Brookhaven's memory of itself. The photographs they used were taken months earlier by student volunteers, and most of the portraits had already been processed by March. By all accounts, it was an unremarkable yearbook season, until the disappearances. When news of the missing students reached the committee, Margaret hesitated. She knew Eleanor and Tommy from classes, Harold only by name. She told the others to delay any mention of them, at least until the administration gave guidance. But the guidance never came. The faculty advisor, a mild-mannered professor named Dr. Charles Winters, assured them that the college prefers continuity, that they should include everyone as planned. So the committee did what they were told. The yearbook had deadlines. Still, something about the work began to feel uneasy. The darkroom, once a lively hub of chatter and laughter, grew subdued. The volunteers came less often. A few students claimed the equipment behaved oddly, exposures overdeveloping, negatives emerging with ghosted double images, faint blurs where no motion had occurred. Margaret chalked it up to stress and exhaustion, but the whispers persisted. One afternoon in May, a sophomore named Daniel Cook, one of the student photographers, noticed something strange while reviewing contact sheets. On a roll labeled Spring Picnic, he found an image of the oak grove filled with laughing students. The sunlight dappled through the branches. But near the edge of the frame stood 3 figures. Out of focus, facing the camera. They seemed too far back to be clearly visible, and yet, when Daniel leaned closer, he swore he recognized them. Eleanor's pale dress, Tommy's dark jacket, Harold's glasses catching the light. He flipped through the other frames. In every one, they were gone. When he showed Margaret, she frowned, shook her head. "It's an older negative," she said. "Maybe left over from before the disappearances." But the date stamped on the roll told another story. May 3rd, 1961. 2 weeks after the trio had vanished. The next day, Daniel returned to the darkroom to recheck the film. But when he opened the drawer where he'd left the roll, it was missing. He assumed Margaret had filed it away. She hadn't. None of the committee members admitted touching it. "Probably misfiled," Dr. Winters said, his tone oddly calm. "We'll find it later." They never did. After that, the committee members began noticing other anomalies. A photograph from the spring dance, showing a group of students beneath paper lanterns, appeared one evening on the light table, though no one recalled developing it. In it, Eleanor's reflection shimmered faintly in the window behind the dancers. Another image showed Tommy standing by the library steps, camera in hand, looking towards something outside the frame. The photo bore no markings, no photographer's initials, and wasn't listed in the roll inventory. Margaret began to keep a journal, jotting notes about each occurrence. Photo number 48, new exposure? No record. Possibly double exposure? Then, days later, faces look sharper now. Expression change? The entries read like fragments of disbelief, small collisions between logic and something she couldn't explain. By June, the rest of the team wanted to quit. One member, a girl named Louise, refused to enter the darkroom after claiming she'd heard voices on the other side of the curtain, faint murmurs overlapping with the sound of the rinse tray. Another student, Roger, said he saw lights flicker even when the switches were off, as if the room were flashing in rhythm with some invisible pulse. When Margaret reported this to Dr. Winters, he dismissed it gently. "Photography can play tricks on tired eyes," he told her. "It's nothing more than fatigue. You're all working too hard." But he also warned them, quietly, not to speak of it outside the committee. "The college is already uneasy," he said. "Let's not add fuel to gossip." That summer, the yearbook finally went to print. It was rushed, completed in long, sleepless nights beneath the basement's hum. Margaret remembered staring at the proofs laid across the table. Pages of smiles, football games, study sessions, and springtime light. It all looked harmless, wholesome. But as she turned each page, her stomach tightened. There they were again. Page 147. A photo she didn't recall approving. The trio standing by the oak grove, Eleanor in her dress, Tommy with his camera, Harold in his glasses. All 3 smiling at something, or someone, just beyond the frame. She checked the caption. Students enjoy the annual senior gathering. But there had been no gathering that spring. Not after the disappearances. She called a printing company in Charleston to ask if there had been a mix-up. The man on the phone told her, puzzled, that all photos had come directly from Brookhaven's submitted negatives. He even described the envelope label, Group Number 7 Oak Grove. The envelope Margaret remembered sealing had contained photos of the baseball team, not that grove. When she checked the negatives herself, She found only blank film. Every image tied to that section of the yearbook was undeveloped, clear as glass. A week later, Daniel Cook, the photographer who had first seen the strange photo, left school abruptly. He never gave a reason. Years later, when contacted by a local journalist, he refused to discuss it. "You don't understand," he said. "We didn't take those pictures." As for Margaret, she handed in the final layouts, packed her notes, and left campus 2 days after printing approval. She wrote one last entry in her journal before leaving. "There's a hum in the negatives. You can almost hear it when the lights go out." When the yearbooks arrived that fall, bound in blue leather with gold lettering, no one questioned the photos. Most students were simply proud to see themselves in print. The missing were included as though they had never gone missing at all. It was the administration's way of closing the wound, pretending that nothing had happened. But for those who knew the truth, every page turn fell heavier, as though the ink itself carried memory. The photo lab was shuttered the next year. The equipment was moved upstairs, and the basement was locked. No one used it again. Some say that if you press your ear against the old door late at night, you can hear the faint clicking of a film reel spinning, though no projector has run there in decades. Others claim the air smells faintly of chemicals, like a darkroom waiting for prints that never dry. In the archives of Brookhaven College, there still exists a single yearbook labeled 1961, the one that shouldn't exist in its current form. And somewhere in its glossy pages, between the smiling faces of forgotten class, 3 students linger, perfectly framed, perfectly lit, perfectly impossible. When the 1961 yearbook finally made its quiet debut on campus, it was as if a ghost had been bound between its covers. Students lined up outside the mailroom, eager to flip through the glossy pages, to find their faces immortalized in a season that already felt far away. Laughter filled the hallway. Quick bursts of nostalgia, gentle teasing over awkward portraits, the soft sound of pages turning. To the casual observer, it was a moment of lightness. But among those who had known the missing students, there was something colder at the edges of that joy, a flicker of unease that no one could quite name. The book itself was beautiful. A navy blue cover embossed with gold letters. The Brookhaven Chronicle, class of 1961. Inside, the layout followed tradition, faculty portraits, departments, campus life, and club photographs. Everything about it looked meticulous, timeless, untouched by tragedy. Yet, as readers moved deeper into volume, small inconsistencies began to surface. It started with a student in the history club who noticed a photograph she didn't remember posing for. Her figure caught mid-laugh, though she was certain she'd been absent that day. Then another student found a caption under his picture that misnamed him entirely. At first, these were dismissed as minor errors. But the anomalies began to cluster around one particular section, student life, spring semester. There, amid the cheerful collages of picnics, sports days, and social gatherings, appeared a sequence of images that unsettled even the most indifferent viewer. They were ordinary at first glance. Students by the oak grove, others studying on a lawn, but something about the lighting, the composition, felt wrong. The colors were muted. The shadows stretched longer than the sun should have allowed. In one image, a group of girls sat cross-legged on the grass, smiling, yet their eyes seemed fixed on a point just outside the frame, their expressions distant, almost hollow. The most unnerving of these photos was the one that would soon become infamous, the Oak Grove portrait. 3 figures standing beneath the arch of trees, sunlight filtering through branches, their faces turned slightly toward the lens. They were unmistakable, Eleanor, Tommy, and Harold, the missing students. Their expressions were calm, serene even, but there was a stiffness to their posture, as if they were aware of being watched. Their shadows fell at an odd angle, stretching away from the light instead of toward it. When the photograph began circulating around campus, the reactions varied. Some students gasped, others laughed nervously, dismissing it as a mistake, a reprint from earlier in the year. "It's just an old photo," they insisted. They probably used last semester's negatives. But those who knew better, who had followed the disappearances, who had attended the search meetings and comforted the grieving parents, felt a sick twist in their stomachs. That photo hadn't existed before. It couldn't have. Margaret Howell, the yearbook editor, returned to campus briefly that October to attend a ceremony. By then, the rumors had grown too loud to ignore. Students whispered about hidden messages, about flickering images appearing only in certain copies. One student claimed that if he looked at the Oak Grove photo under fluorescent light, Eleanor's face appeared to move, just slightly, her eyes turning toward the reader. Another said the pages around that section felt damp, as though the ink never quite dried. When Margaret was approached about these stories, she appeared shaken. "I don't know what happened," she said quietly to a fellow student journalist. "I don't remember approving that page." The journalist pressed her for details, but she refused to elaborate, only muttering that some of the negatives had been misplaced or perhaps replaced. A week later, an anonymous note appeared on the library bulletin board. It read, "Check the library archives, lower drawer, cabinet 3. See who signed the printing forms." No one claimed to have posted it, but two students, curious and brave, decided to look. What they found made them both drop out before the semester ended. The archive drawer contained a carbon copy of the final approval form for the yearbook print run. The signature was Margaret's, but beneath it, in a different ink, was a second signature, E. Marsh. The registrar confirmed that no one by that name was employed by Brookhaven College. By winter, the campus was buzzing with theories. Some said the photo was a prank, that a darkroom assistant had inserted the image as a cruel joke. Others believed the missing students had returned briefly, perhaps before their deaths, and that the photograph captured something not meant for this side. A few more pragmatic voices suggested it was simply a case of mistaken identity. Similar-looking students in the right place at the wrong time. But a new layer of mystery appeared when a printing company worker from Charleston contacted the college, asking for confirmation about a strange detail in the order. He explained that during the processing phase, one of the printing plates for the student life section had developed a chemical anomaly. "We thought it was water damage," he said, "but it wasn't." The image kept reappearing, even when we replaced the plate, like the metal remembered the picture. The college administration quickly dismissed the claim, labeling it as manufacturing confusion. Yet they quietly requested that no further copies be printed. The remaining unsold yearbooks were boxed up and stored in the basement of the administration building. A handful of copies were distributed to students, but most vanished into storage, a decision that would later fuel endless speculation. Meanwhile, those who had copies of the yearbook began reporting small, eerie details. In one case, a student named Lillian wrote to her friend that her copy seemed different each time she opened it. She described how the Oak Grove photo appeared slightly darker one evening, the background more blurred. She even claimed that one of the figures, Harold, had turned his head slightly in her version, his gaze now angled toward the camera. Her roommate dismissed it as imagination. But when they compared Lillian's yearbook with another copy from classmate, the difference was real. Harold's head was indeed tilted, subtly but unmistakably. Within weeks, more stories emerged, pages appearing out of sequence, captions rewritten in faint, gray ink. One copy found in the library had an entire section missing. The student life pages torn cleanly out, as if by a razor. No one ever discovered who did it or why. By the end of the semester, a quiet dread had settled over the college. Students avoided talking about the missing trio or the yearbook at all. Professors stopped mentioning the incident. Even the administration seemed eager to let the story fade. Yet, beneath the calm, a deeper fear lingered, not just that something strange had happened, but that whatever had happened wasn't finished. For Margaret Howell, who left town soon after, the yearbook would become an unshakable shadow. In a letter found years later, she wrote, "They told us to preserve memory, but some memories resist a page. The camera takes what it sees. Sometimes it keeps what it shouldn't." And so the Brookhaven Chronicle, meant to celebrate a year of scholarship and youth, became something else entirely, a monument of absence, a book that captured not only faces, but the unspoken tension of a mystery that refused to rest. To hold it was to feel a pulse beneath the paper, a heartbeat between the photographs, as though somewhere in that printed silence, the missing still waited to be seen. The whisper surrounding the Brookhaven yearbook refused to fade. By early 1962, the story had taken on a life of its own, carried from dormitory to dormitory like a superstition that no one wanted to believe, but no one dared to dismiss. The administration attempted to stifle the conversation, removing remaining copies of the 1961 edition from library shelves, instructing professors not to reference the missing students during lectures, and even threatening disciplinary action against those spreading falsehoods about the college. Yet, the more they tried to silence it, the more the legend grew, weaving itself into the daily life of the campus like a haunting refrain. Students began calling it the yearbook that remembered. Some swore the book would open itself to the Oak Grove photo, no matter where you began. Others claimed to have seen faint smudges, fingerprints, perhaps, on the pages, though no one had touched them. At night, the campus radio club sometimes picked up strange static bursts, thin and rhythmic, that seemed to align with the yearbook's page numbers, as if each photograph carried its own hidden frequency. It became an undercurrent of unease, not quite superstition, not quite truth, but something that lived in the space between. One of the first to take the matter seriously was a literature professor named Dr. Henry Vallon, who had an interest in folklore and regional hauntings. A quiet man with a habit of pacing when he spoke, Vallon began collecting stories from students who claimed to have experienced odd phenomena connected to the yearbook. He recorded testimonies on a reel-to-reel tape machine, filing them away in unmarked boxes that would later vanish from his office without explanation. In one of the surviving notes from his research, dated February 14, 1962, Vallon wrote, "The photographs do not behave as photographs should. Light interacts with the ink as though it were still sensitive, still alive. When held near a flame or flashlight, shadows shift within the print. This cannot be explained by reflection or degradation. The image reacts to observation." That spring, a journalism major named Ruth, Caldwell decided to investigate the rumors for the campus newspaper. Ruth was known for her relentless curiosity, often poking into stories that others found uncomfortable. She tracked down a copy of the yearbook from a retired librarian, promising to return it after a week. What she found left her unsettled in ways she could never quite articulate. Her first night examining the book, she noticed something small. The texture of the pages seemed inconsistent. Most were smooth, but the Oak Grove spread felt rougher, the paper thicker. Under the lamplight, faint impressions appeared beneath the printed ink, as though another image had been pressed faintly beneath the surface. She held the page at an angle, letting the light graze its surface. There, barely visible, was the outline of words, handwritten, reversing pressure of something once written on top. She traced them carefully onto another sheet, using pencil rubbings to make out the letters. The words were fragmented, incomplete. They said the picture would show the way, and then lower down, "Don't stay after dark." Ruth initially thought it was a prank, but the more she studied the pages, the more she realized the handwriting appeared in other sections too. Tiny, almost imperceptible, sometimes in the margins, sometimes behind the ink. Each time, the words were warnings, half-formed thoughts, or names written over and over. One page repeated Eleanor 12 times in a faint descending curve, like someone whispering it into the paper. Ruth's roommate, a biology student named Anne, tried to dissuade her from continuing. "It's just ink bleed," she said, "maybe from the press plates." But Ruth couldn't let it go. She returned to the librarian's basement to ask where the copy had come from. The librarian, an older woman named Miss Green, frowned when Ruth mentioned the book. "That one?" she asked quietly. "You should have left it where it was." When Ruth pressed her, Miss Green admitted that the copy had been pulled from the batch returned by the Charleston printing press, the ones that didn't pass inspection. That night, Ruth stayed up until nearly 3 a.m., studying the photos under a magnifying glass. In the Oak Grove image, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Faint outlines between the branches in the background, shapes like small lights or orbs scattered through the leaves. She compared it with another student's copy the next day. But in that one, the background was completely dark. The lights existed only in her version. Ruth's article never went to print. According to campus records, the typewritten draft she submitted to the Brookhaven Voice disappeared from the editor's desk before publication. The only remaining evidence is a carbon copy found years later in the college archives. In it, Ruth wrote, "These images are not static. They breathe. They age. Each copy carries its own version of the truth, as if the camera captured not a moment but a loop, a pulse of time that continues to live on the page. When I close the book, I still feel it, like something watching from behind the photograph." A few weeks later, Ruth withdrew from the college, citing personal reasons. Her friends describe her as distracted and pale, always glancing over her shoulder. Before she left, she donated several boxes of notes to Dr. Vallon, who cataloged them briefly before his own sudden resignation later that summer. He would later tell a colleague, "Some stories want to be told. Others punish you for trying." Meanwhile, the administration's attempts to erase the incident only deepened the mystery. They ordered the destruction of the remaining unsold yearbooks, claiming storage space was needed for new materials. The janitorial staff reported that the burning process took longer than expected. "The pages didn't catch easily," one of them said. "It was like the paper didn't want to burn." By autumn, Brookhaven College tried to move on. New students arrived, unaware of the strange events of the previous year. The old oak grove was trimmed back, its branches cleared for a new walking path. But those who had been there the year before avoided the area, especially after dark. They said the air felt charged there, still heavy as if waiting. In the quiet corners of the library, the rumor persisted. Some students said you could still find fragments of the yearbook. Single pages slipped between old library books. Photographs without captions left in study carrels. Others whispered that on certain nights, if you stood near the grove at dusk, you could hear the faint shuffle of footsteps and the click of a camera shutter echoing in the trees. No official record connects these accounts, but something unspoken remained on campus, a collective silence shared among those who had seen too much. Even decades later, when alumni gathered for reunions, the conversation always skipped over 1961. And somewhere deep in the restricted archives, a single surviving copy of the yearbook remained sealed in a plain gray box, marked only with the initials HV. Inside, the pages lay still and quiet. But if you were to hold it long enough, under the right light, you might swear that the faces within it shifted ever so slightly to meet your gaze. By 1963, Brookhaven College had almost succeeded in burying the story. The missing students were officially declared deceased, the records neatly closed, and the yearbook incident relegated to rumor, a tale whispered by seniors to frighten newcomers. The administration's new policy prohibited discussion of past tragedies in classrooms or publications. On paper, the college had restored order, but beneath the calm surface, a subtle tension still ran through the halls, a quiet pulse of something unresolved. It began again with an exhibit. That spring, the art department announced a retrospective photography show featuring student works from the past decade. The display was meant to celebrate Brookhaven's creative history, landscapes, portraits, and archival campus imagery. Among the submissions was a crate of old negatives donated anonymously, discovered in a forgotten storage closet near the basement where the 1961 yearbook committee once worked. The label on the box read simply, "Archives, do not open without supervisor." The faculty advisor for the exhibit, Professor Jeanette Lorne, was new to the college and unaware of the history attached to those words. She assigned a small group of students to review the negatives and select images suitable for enlargement. The group met in the old photography lab, reopened for the first time in nearly 2 years. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of dust and old chemicals. The first roll they examined was harmless, shots of campus buildings, sports events, and faculty gatherings. The next roll was stranger, overexposed images of the oak grove, the same grove where Eleanor, Tommy, and Harold had last been seen. The photographs were oddly framed, tilted, as though the photographer had been moving quickly or nervous. But what drew immediate attention was a recurring shape in the background, a pale blur that seemed to drift between the trees from one frame to another, too distinct to be a light leak, too defined to be coincidence. At first, the students laughed it off. "It's probably damage," one said, but as they advanced to the negatives, the shape grew sharper, taking on what looked like a human outline. A figure, faint but present, standing where the missing trio had once been photographed. When Professor Lauren joined them later that afternoon, she noticed something even more unsettling. Each frame was stamped with a date, March 20th, 1961, the same day the three students had disappeared. She frowned, assuming the negatives were mislabeled, but the more she examined them, the clearer it became that these were not ordinary mistakes. That evening, when the photographs were developed and hung to dry, something impossible occurred. One of the students, James Avery, swore that as he turned off the red lamp and prepared to leave, he saw the photos sway on their clips as if brushed by a draft, though the air was still. The next morning, when they returned, several prints had changed. Shadows had deepened, background details that hadn't been visible before, faint outlines of faces, perhaps, seemed to have surfaced overnight. The exhibit went forward nonetheless. The Oak Grove photographs were framed and displayed in the main hall under the title Campus Memories, 1961. Students stopped to admire the sepia tones, the sense of nostalgia. But those who lingered too long reported a strange sensation, a pressure behind the eyes, a feeling of being watched from within the frame. A maintenance worker later claimed he saw condensation forming on the glass of the Oak Grove photo, as though someone had exhaled against it. Then, during the second week of the exhibit, one of the framed photos shattered. It happened during visiting hours, in full view of students and faculty. No one touched it, no one bumped the wall. The glass simply cracked down the center with a sharp, clean sound, splitting the image in half, separating the trees from the faint figure in the background. The crowd fell silent. Professor Lauren rushed forward, tried to maintain calm, but when she lifted the frame from the wall, she noticed something else. The paper backing behind the photo was wet. She stored the damaged print in her office and locked the door. That night, she couldn't sleep. Around midnight, she returned to the exhibit hall alone. The building was empty except for the faint hum of the ventilation system. She unlocked her office, turned on the lamp, and stared at the photograph lying on her desk. The split glass reflected the light in two halves. Under the glare, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Letters faintly etched into the emulsion near the bottom edge, almost hidden in the grain. 3 initials, E.M., T.R., H.F., Eleanor Marsh, Thomas Reed, Harold Finch. Her breath caught. The following morning, she brought the photograph to the dean's office. He listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You must be mistaken. Those students are no longer part of the official record." His tone was firm, final. "Please don't bring this up again. Brookhaven has moved on." She left his office shaken, clutching the photo against her chest. That afternoon, when she returned to retrieve the rest of the negatives, she found the lab empty. Every roll of film, every print, gone. The storage cabinet stood open, its drawers bare. The custodian claimed no one had entered the room overnight, yet the padlock lay snapped cleanly in two on the floor. That weekend, Professor Lauren resigned from her position, citing health reasons. Her resignation letter was polite, unremarkable, except for one line at the end. "The past at Brookhaven has not settled. It waits for acknowledgement." After the exhibit, the atmosphere on campus changed again. The Oak Grove photographs were removed, but rumors of what they showed persisted. Some said the faint figure in the background had resembled a fourth person, someone standing slightly behind the missing trio, half hidden by a tree, watching them. Others believed the image had captured something else entirely, something that had been there long before 1961. Over time, the college built a new wing where the old photography lab had been. The basement was sealed off, the doors replaced. Yet, those who walked through the new corridors sometimes reported an odd distortion. Lights flickering, the faint smell of developer fluid, a metallic tang in the air. Years later, a security guard assigned to the art building claimed he often heard the sound of film reels turning late at night, echoing from beneath the floorboards. Once, he followed the sound to a storage room, only to find an old slide projector sitting on a table, unplugged, the bulb faintly warm. On the wall behind it, someone had scrawled in chalk, "They never left the frame." Brookhaven tried to forget the yearbook, the missing students, the photographs. But every few years, something resurfaced, a misplaced image, a note found in a forgotten drawer, a rumor passed between students. And always, it returned to the same haunting question. Was it possible for a photograph to hold more than an image? Could it hold memory? Or worse, a presence that refused to fade? Even now, alumni who revisit the campus speak of a quiet unease that lingers near the grove, especially at twilight. The wind there seems to carry a faint clicking rhythm, like a mechanical whisper of a camera shutter, repeating a story no one wants to hear, a moment that refuses to stay in the past, developing itself again and again in the darkroom of time. By the mid-1960s, the legend of Brookhaven had begun to seep beyond the campus walls, whispered through small-town diners, county fairs, and late-night radio programs that specialized in strange tales of the American South. Locals called it the yearbook haunting, though few could agree on what exactly haunted whom. Some said it was the spirits of the 3 lost students, trapped forever within their final photograph. Others believed the yearbook itself had absorbed something from that day in the oak grove, a lingering echo, a recording of despair that continued to play each time the book was opened. Whatever the truth, the name Brookhaven College had taken on a quiet infamy, one the administration could no longer fully erase. In 1965, a Charleston journalist named Walter Pierce arrived on campus with a notebook full of rumors and a determination to separate fact from fiction. Pierce was a seasoned reporter for the Carolina Chronicle, known for his measured tone and methodical investigations. He wasn't the kind to chase ghost stories. But something about Brookhaven intrigued him. The contradictions in the official record, the missing yearbook archives, the sudden resignations of faculty who had once worked on the 1961 committee. It's like the place swallowed its own story, he told his editor before making the trip inland. When he arrived, Brookhaven greeted him with a polite chill. The dean refused an interview, offering only a brief written statement. Brookhaven College has no record of any anomalies regarding its publications. We wish to focus on the future, not myths. The few staff members willing to talk did so off the record, their voices low, their eyes darting toward closed doors. Pierce spent his first night in town at the local inn, going over notes and old news clippings. The disappearance of the 3 students, Eleanor Marsh, Thomas Reed, and Harold Finch, had made brief headlines in 1961. Then faded. No bodies were ever found. The local sheriff's report suggested an accident during a nighttime hike, though no evidence supported the claim. Yet the detail that caught Pierce's attention most was the date, March 20th, 1961, the same day the negatives had been taken, the same day the Oak Grove photographs were dated. He visited the college archives the next morning. The librarian on duty, a thin woman with steel-gray hair named Mrs. Clay, seemed uneasy when he asked about the yearbook. That edition's restricted, she said curtly, no public access. When he pressed her, she finally relented and led him to a small reading room. There, she produced a single copy of the 1961 Brookhaven Chronicle, wrapped in muslin cloth. "You didn't get it from me," she whispered, and left him alone. The book's cover had faded to a dull navy, the gold lettering nearly worn away. When he opened it, a faint odor rose from the pages, something chemical, like developer fluid long evaporated. The first half of the book was unremarkable. Smiling students, faculty portraits, scenes of campus life. But when Pierce reached the student life, spring semester section, the temperature in the room seemed to dip. The infamous Oak Grove photo was there, glossy and still. The trio stood beneath the trees, light filtering through branches like thin ribbons of smoke. Their expressions were calm, almost gentle. But what unsettled him was not their faces. It was the background. He leaned closer. Behind the students, deeper in the grove, faint shapes seemed to flicker between the leaves. Outlines, not trees, but of more figures. Dozens of them, perhaps barely visible, their silhouettes interwoven with the forest's darkness. He turned the page quickly, his pulse quickening. In the margin of the next page, he noticed something faint, a handwritten scrawl in pencil. "They're not missing, they're waiting." The handwriting was small, hurried. He photographed the note with his Polaroid camera and continued reading. Near the end of the book, where the index had begun, a single page had been glued shut. The adhesive was yellowed with age, brittle. Pierce hesitated. then gently pried the page loose with the edge of a penknife. Beneath it was another photograph, smaller, uncaptioned, printed in sepia rather than black and white. It showed the same oak grove, empty this time, the trees bare as if in winter. In the center of the frame, however, stood something unusual, a chair, an old wooden chair, angled slightly toward the camera. Nothing else. The grass around it was flat, as though someone had been sitting there moments before the shot was taken. He took another Polaroid, but when he looked at the developed image, the chair was gone. Only the trees remained. That night, Pierce stayed late at the library, reviewing the microfilm archives. He found records of the yearbook's printing order, dated June 1961, signed by two names, Margaret Howell and E. Marsh. His pulse slowed as he read the second signature. Eleanor Marsh had vanished 3 months before that date. When he returned to the inn, the innkeeper, an older man who'd lived in Brookhaven all his life, stopped him at the counter. "You're looking into that yearbook business, aren't you?" the man said. His voice was gravelly but not unkind. "I remember that year. We could hear the dogs out in the woods for days during the search. But nobody found a thing. Then, a few weeks later, people started saying they'd seen lights in the grove, like flash bulbs going off at night. Some said they even heard laughter." Pierce asked if he'd seen it himself. The man hesitated. "Once. I was driving past on my way home from the station. Thought I saw 3 shapes standing under the trees. The one in the middle had something shiny in their hand. I thought maybe a lantern, but there was no light after that. Just dark." The next morning, Pierce visited the grove. The air was cool, the trees older now, their roots thick and twisted. The ground was soft with fallen leaves. He walked to the clearing where the photographs had been taken. The silence there was unnatural, almost oppressive. No birds, no wind. Only the faint rustle of leaves underfoot. He stood where the trio had once posed, pulled out his notebook, and wrote, "It feels like the forest is holding its breath." As he turned to leave, he noticed something glinting near the base of an oak. He knelt down and brushed away the dirt. It was a small piece of metal, a camera shutter release, broken clean in half. The brand was the same model used by the college photography department in 1961. That discovery would never make it into print. Pierce's editor received a telegram a week later. Returning early. Story closed. No publication. When the editor tried to contact him afterward, Pierce didn't respond. 2 months later, his car was found abandoned near a rest stop outside Columbia. His notes, camera, and tape recorder were missing. Only one item was recovered from his belongings, a single Polaroid photograph of an empty grove. At first glance, it appeared ordinary, but when examined under magnification, a faint smudge appeared near the center, a chair, barely visible, and beside it, 3 figures half faded into the background, their outlines merging with the trees. The newspaper never ran the story. Brookhaven's name faded from headlines again, left to the dust of local memory. Yet in quiet corners of South Carolina, people still spoke of the journalist who vanished while chasing a ghost story, and of the... By 1972, Brookhaven College had begun modernizing, yet the oak grove remained a quiet, almost sacred site. Construction workers clearing parts of the campus uncovered rusted tripods, broken glass plates, and corroded camera equipment buried beneath the forest floor. At first, the items seemed like harmless remnants of the photography department, but then they found a sealed metal canister containing undeveloped film. Faded initials EM were barely visible on its surface. The canister eventually ended up in the hands of Laura King, a graduate journalism student working on her thesis about forgotten local mysteries. Late one night, in the amber glow of the darkroom, Laura developed the film. The first few frames showed ordinary campus scenes, but then the oak grove appeared. 3 students, Eleanor Marsh, Thomas Reed, and Harold Finch, stood beneath the trees, caught mid-motion. A faint mist curled around their feet, and the branches behind them twisted into symmetrical patterns, almost deliberately framing the trio. Later frames were even stranger. By the last, the students were gone, replaced only by the forest floor and a broken lens ring. Scratches etched onto the film spelled the chilling words, "Still here." Laura showed the negatives to her advisor, who dismissed the anomalies as accidental markings. But she felt something deeper. The images suggested another presence during the photo shoot, a second camera capturing moments just out of reach, revealing layers of time. Tracing the origin of the film, she located Margaret Howell, the 1961 yearbook editor and one of the last people to see the trio alive. Margaret's voice trembled as she recounted the day. Eleanor had insisted on photographing the grove herself, saying softly, "They're already watching." Margaret had turned away to adjust her tripod, and when she looked back, the students had vanished. The official story remained that the students had gone missing during a hike, but Margaret remembered subtle details that had never been recorded. Shadows moving impossibly, patterns in light, and the forest seeming to hold its breath. Laura meticulously documented these accounts and compared them with her negatives, discovering faint shapes and scratches that mirrored the yearbook images. It was as if the grove itself had been capturing, preserving, and responding to their presence over time. Weeks later, the darkroom was vandalized. Chemicals were spilled across counters, and the negatives were gone. The only clue left behind was a damp footprint, bare and small, leading out into the night. Despite this, Laura rewrote her thesis from memory, titling it Echoes in the Grove, the vanishing of Brookhaven's class of '61. The paper was quietly rejected, and within 2 years, Laura herself disappeared near the road leading to the grove. Her notes and tape recorder were left behind, along with a single undeveloped Polaroid. Once processed, the image revealed only the grove, empty under moonlight, yet faint, ghostly shapes could be seen standing at its center, mirroring the missing trio. The college halted construction near the grove, citing unstable soil, though locals whispered differently. The ground didn't merely sink, it swallowed, and those who lingered too long risked being absorbed into its memory. Students reported strange phenomena, shadows moving against the trees, faint clicking noises like distant camera shutters, and yearbooks appearing in unlikely places, their pages subtly altered. The story of Brookhaven was no longer confined in 1961. It had spread into consciousness, a persistent presence that waited for anyone curious enough to witness it. The events of 1972 revealed that the mystery of Brookhaven was alive and adaptive. Photographs, negatives, and the yearbook were not passive records but dynamic objects, subtly reshaping the story each time they were observed. Laura King's disappearance and the eerie images left behind confirmed that anyone who pursued the story too closely risked being drawn into the phenomenon itself. The oak grove and its photographs were no longer remnants of a past tragedy. They had become a living narrative, demanding witnesses, reshaping perception, and quietly asserting that Eleanor, Thomas, and Harold had never truly left. By the late 1970s, Brookhaven College had long become shrouded in whispers. The oak grove, fenced and off-limits, carried a subtle menace, a place where time seemed to hesitate, and visitors often reported a chill, a feeling of being watched. Jonathan Reeves, a young filmmaker, arrived to document the legend, armed with cameras, a recorder, and Reeves' meticulous research from prior investigations. Unlike journalists before him, he sought to capture both history and the lingering presence of the missing students. Reeves entered the grove at dusk. The air was thick, the trees forming a canopy that filtered fading sunlight. At the clearing where the trio had once posed, he found a rusted tripod partially sunk into the earth. As he photographed the area, subtle anomalies appeared. Faint silhouettes and long exposure shots mirrored the positions of Eleanor, Thomas, and Harold from decades-old yearbook photos. A fourth figure sometimes appeared, partially obscured by trees, as if observing him. Reeves set up a small observation camp in the grove. At night, he recorded faint clicks resembling camera shutters and silvery flashes that weren't from his equipment. Each morning, the photographs revealed slight shifts, shadows deepened, shapes moved, and the fourth figure appeared more prominently. Cross-referencing with old yearbook pages and negatives, Reeves noticed consistent patterns. The grove's layout, tree angles, and even sunlight variations corresponded with images captured decades earlier. Local stories corroborated his observations. Alumni reported seeing the trio's forms or hearing whispers in empty halls. Reeves concluded that the phenomena were not merely residual memory, but responsive to attention. Observing the grove activated traces of the student's presence. The yearbook itself mirrored these shifts, with captions changing subtly and previously unseen figures emerging. By the end of his investigation, Reeves understood that the oak grove and the yearbook were intertwined, alive with echoes of the past. They were instruments of persistence, capturing moments across decades and silently insisting that anyone who observed them became part of the ongoing story of Eleanor, Thomas, and Harold. Reeves meticulously cataloged the yearbook, negatives, and alumni accounts, realizing the 1961 events were more than a disappearance. They were a phenomenon. Shadows and photographs hinted at figures never fully seen. Inscriptions etched into film whispered messages like, "Still here" or "Watching." Former students recalled strange encounters, reflections in windows, whispers in empty halls, and fleeting glimpses of the trio in the grove. Even decades later, the grove seemed alive, responding to attention, its trees framing figures in impossible ways. The yearbook itself evolved. Captions shifted. Photos revealed subtle differences, and previously unseen details emerged when carefully observed. Reeves experimented with exposure, light, and angles, discovering the figures' eyes often seemed aware of the camera. The phenomenon wasn't static. It persisted and adapted, suggesting the trio's presence endured within both the physical space of the grove and the medium of photography. By the late 1980s, Reeves compiled his most complete archive: negatives, prints, written testimonies, and personal observations. Yet the story remained incomplete. Each document was a fragment of a larger reality that refused closure. He concluded that Brookhaven's mystery wasn't about bodies or crime. It was about memory and presence persisting across time. The oak grove, the yearbook, and photographs were instruments of that persistence, and anyone who observed them became part of the ongoing narrative. Even as Reeves documented everything, he felt the story watching him back. The phenomenon was subtle, psychological, and persistent. Brookhaven was no longer merely a college. It was a locus where time and perception intertwined, a place where observation could awaken echoes that never faded, and where the vanished students lingered, quietly, insistently, and alive in the spaces between light and shadow. By the early 1990s, Brookhaven had modernized, yet the oak grove retained its eerie presence. Marcus Bell, a graduate student studying folklore, became obsessed with the missing students and the yearbook. He accessed previously restricted archives, finding negatives, letters, and photographs detailing the trio's fascination with light, time, and photography. These artifacts suggested they had deliberately captured moments that allowed their presence to persist beyond 1961. Marcus experimented in the grove with cameras, infrared equipment, and long-exposure shots. Subtle anomalies appeared: blurs of movement, faint heat signatures, and rhythmic clicks resembling a camera shutter. The yearbook mirrored these changes. Scratches, altered captions, and new figures emerged in margins, as if the book itself responded to observation. Alumni corroborated strange experiences: faint reflections, whispers of names, and glimpses of figures standing still among the trees. Through careful documentation, Marcus realized the phenomenon was tied to perception. Observation activated traces of the students' presence. Attention itself seemed to awaken them. The trio's memory persisted, not in the physical world alone, but in consciousness, photographs, and text. Brookhaven had become more than a campus. It was a locus where past and present intertwined, a place where stories lived on, waiting for the curious to witness them. Marcus understood the truth. Certainty was impossible. The grove, the yearbook, and the photographs were dynamic, alive, and patient. Those who engaged with them became part of the story, subtly drawn into the ongoing presence of Eleanor, Thomas, and Harold. The mystery endured, quietly, insistently, refusing to end.